A Marine veteran limps into a pristine clinic, voice shaking, pain written across his face, only to be told his agony is just aging. He secretly records the dismissive doctor. The next day, that video ignites a firestorm that reaches all the way to D.C. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The fluorescent lights hummed above as Jimmy stood outside the clinic in the rain, the front doors hissing shut behind him. His breath fogged in the chill, but he barely noticed it. He was still shaking, not from cold, but from a cocktail of rage and humiliation. His fingers clenched tightly around the phone in his jacket pocket, where the audio file sat like a ticking time bomb. Caldwell's voice echoed in his ears. "You vets all say the same thing." Jimmy had been through hell and made it back home with pieces missing. Some physical, most invisible. He didn't talk about Fallujah, unless he had to. He didn't trade war stories like currency. He'd spent years trying to rebuild his life, brick by fragile brick. But pain had a way of cracking everything. The back injury wasn't just a nuisance. It was a thief. It stole his sleep, his mobility, his ability to work a full shift without collapsing into the driver's seat of his rusting Ford Ranger, drenched in sweat from the effort of just existing. And still, he'd waited 3 months for that appointment. 3 months of paperwork, referrals, and phone trees that led nowhere. Now he had a voice recording and a prescription for over-the-counter meds that hadn't worked since the 2nd year of his deployment. Jimmy slid into the driver's seat, biting back a groan as a spasm cut down his spine like a rusted blade. He winced, pulled his phone out, and stared at the screen. The audio file blinked back at him. REC 2025052.wave. He played the clip, just a few seconds, enough to hear Caldwell's voice again. Dismissing him like a nuisance. He didn't want revenge. That wasn't the Marine Corps way, but justice? That was something different. His thumb hovered over the share icon. He thought about the other veterans who had limped through that same sterile hallway, clutching their folders like life vests in a sea of bureaucracy. The ones who didn't record anything. The ones who walked away in silence, feeling small and ashamed and unbelieved. He tapped his contact list. There was one name he hadn't used in months, Alicia Barrett. She wasn't just a friend. She was a local journalist who'd once embedded with his unit in Afghanistan, back before everything went to hell. She knew what it meant when someone said, "This ain't normal." Jimmy typed, "Got something you need to hear. Doctor at a VA clinic. Real piece of work. Could use your ears on this. Confidential for now. You in?" He hit send. 10 seconds later, the 3 bouncing dots appeared. "I'm in. Call me." As the call connected, Jimmy felt something shift, not just in his chest, but in the air around him. He'd spent so long just surviving. Now, for the first time in years, he was about to go on offense. He wasn't the only one Caldwell had written off, but he might be the first who refused to be erased. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted over one another, voices bouncing off the aluminum sides of military vehicles and the hum of portable generators. But Jimmy sat still, silent, in a standard-issue green folding chair, hands on his knees, as the world he knew slowly unraveled and reformed in front of him. The VA's mobile hospital had landed like a statement of war, on bureaucracy, on negligence, on the apathy that had soaked into too many corners of the system. Military-grade tents with Red Cross flags snapped in the wind, soldiers in camouflage rolled out stretchers, and VA physicians, real ones, the kind who looked at their patients, moved with crisp, urgent purpose. It was surreal. And for Jimmy, it felt like watching a forgotten promise come back from the dead. He had arrived before dawn, not out of vanity, but disbelief. He had to see it with his own eyes, that this had grown from a single, pocket-recorded truth. The line had started forming an hour after midnight. Some vets came on foot, some in wheelchairs, some brought crumpled files, others clutched faded photographs like proof that they had once mattered. They came from towns Jimmy had never heard of, every age, every branch, some with faces hollowed by time, and others with eyes still twitching at sudden noises. Each one passed by him. Some nodded, some said nothing. But a few laid a hand on his shoulder in that silent brotherhood way, the way soldiers said thank you without words, because words weren't built for that kind of gratitude. Jimmy didn't smile. He didn't bask. There was no satisfaction here, only gravity, the kind that comes when something heavy, something real, shifts its weight, and the world tilts with it. Across the lot, Dr. Caldwell's clinic stood quiet, blinds drawn tight. A paper sign on the door read, "Closed until further notice," and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Cameras had panned to it all morning, as if waiting for someone to emerge and face the crowd, but no one did. Caldwell had vanished into his silence, while the voices he'd tried to dismiss now roared louder than ever. Jimmy glanced down at his phone. A new message blinked from Alicia. "CNN wants an interview. Your call. No pressure." He stared at the screen, then back at the tents, the people, the sheer scale of it all. Not long ago, he was just another number in a queue, another ignored chart. Now, he was something else. Unwilling, perhaps, but undeniably central. He locked the phone. No response yet. This moment wasn't about him. Nearby, a young medic knelt before an elderly vet, helping him pull off his boots for a podiatry exam. A woman in navy blues handed out water bottles with the ease of someone used to crisis. Somewhere in the crowd, a man broke down in tears as he was finally scheduled for a spinal MRI. Finally. Jimmy exhaled through his nose, the air sharp with diesel and wet grass. His back still ached. His PTSD hadn't disappeared. But something had changed, not just around him, but within. For once, the silence didn't feel like dismissal. It felt like listening. Dr. Ethan Caldwell had always imagined himself untouchable, insulated by years of private practice, shielded by white walls, marble counters, and a wall of diplomas. When the complaints came before, he tossed them in the shredder without a second thought. Bureaucracy always buried the rest. But now, his sanctuary had become a bunker under siege. It started with missed appointments. Cancellations trickled in, then flooded. The receptionist's voice grew strained from explaining empty schedules. A week later, the phones stopped ringing altogether. Then came the protests. Veterans and civilians alike gathered outside the clinic, not with chants of vengeance, but with signs that cut deeper. Pain is not an inconvenience. Respect is treatment. We deserve more than Tylenol. Online, his name became synonymous with systemic neglect. Medical forums blacklisted him. Review sites drowned in a sea of one-star ratings, each one more detailed and damning than the last. Former patients who had once suffered in silence began sharing their stories, verifying the patterns, giving flesh and weight to the pain he had dismissed. What had once been anecdotal was now documented. Within 2 weeks, the state medical board suspended him, citing gross ethical misconduct and systemic neglect of duty. His clinic, now empty, stood like a mausoleum to ego and indifference. But a different kind of energy pulsed just a few feet away. The field hospital buzzed, not with chaos, but with coordinated care. Jimmy Walters walked between tents in a VA volunteer vest, clipboard in one hand, bottled water in the other. He limped a little less now, not because his pain was gone, it wasn't, but because he had something to move toward. Veterans knew him by name now. Some sought him out for help filling out forms. Others just needed a familiar face to talk to before a difficult diagnosis. Jimmy offered both, steady and quiet, always listening, always present. He didn't see himself as anything special. In fact, when a local news crew cornered him between appointments and asked what it felt like to win, he almost laughed. "Win?" he echoed, brows furrowed. "It's not about that." He gestured behind him, to the rows of tents, to the volunteers in uniform, to the vets in line. "It's about being heard. For years we were called broken. We were ignored. Hell, we were told our pain was in our heads. But look around. No one's turning away here. No one's brushing us off. This," he tapped his chest lightly, hand over his heart, This is what respect looks like. Not pity, not photo ops, just people who give a damn. The camera panned to his face, but the emotion in his voice said more than any headline ever could. Jimmy never asked for this. He didn't rehearse for it. But somehow, in doing the simplest thing, refusing to let his truth be buried, he had become a living answer to a question this country had ignored for too long. And as more mobile VA units appeared across the nation, set up in parking lots, church fields, and forgotten towns, it became clear it wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement.